Hello, I'm Kimberly Parnell, and you are listening to Engaging Texas Families, a podcast from the Parent and Family Engagement Statewide Initiative of Texas. Let's jump into today's episode. We are back today with another exciting episode of Engaging Texas Families. We're thrilled to welcome the Constantinos back with us again today for the final episode in this podcast series. It's been an incredible journey so far, exploring the case studies in this book, leading to some truly, I think, valuable conversations over the last several episodes. I'm sure you've all gained useful knowledge, and if you're not fully caught up, now's the perfect time to go back and revisit those earlier episodes. Steve and Peggy, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Well, we've covered, like I said, so many great case studies in this series, but if I'm honest, the one we're going to talk about today is actually one of my favorites. It's a top pick for me. So, Steve, I think it is actually one of your favorites too. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. The problem presented in this case study is one that is pretty common, and that is, how do we inspire disengaged families to come to events? I hear as I travel around the country, we can't get people to come, or we just see the same people over and over again. So this case study, which really combines a couple of different principles, but we're here today talking about community engagement. This case study is about teachers who said, we're not having success with math night, and so they are looking to their community to figure out if there's something different that they can do. Remember, we've said before, family engagement should not be about more; it should be about doing things differently. And they wondered, what would happen if we moved the math night from the school to a place in the community? Would that inspire more folks to come? Well, they ended up, after a process of probably community asset mapping, which we can talk about, landed on a laundromat and invited families and kids to a math night, but not at the school, at the local neighborhood laundromat. And it was very successful. People came, and hence the title, Wash and Learn. You could get your laundry done and learn a bit about math, learn a bit about how you can support your children at home. And it, by all accounts, was a raving success. And I think at the end of the story, it talks about the teachers trying to figure out what they're going to do next, what do another one. So it's an example, I think, of using community assets that may not be the first thing you think about. When we think about community engagement, we think about, I think, all the wonderful things that schools are already doing. But in this case, would we have considered doing math night at a laundromat? These teachers did. They thought, what the heck? They weren't getting the support or the attendance they wanted at school, and they found out that moving it was a good idea because that did inspire families. Why did they come? Well, there could be a number of reasons. Transportation could be a reason. Kind of fear of the school, fear of going to the school could be a reason. There could be, having other children at home in tow. We can bring the other children to the laundromat and still participate. So there's a lot of different reasons why this worked. I think this worked out for them. As is the case for all of the case studies, every one of them is based in the truth. Of course, they've been fictionalized and changed a little bit. But this case study actually is based on a group of teachers who did exactly what the case study suggests, and that is to move things into the community when we're not seeing attendance at school events the way we want them, and to understand that every community has assets beyond sometimes what we think about the traditional community engagement. I talk a lot about engaging the greater community as a way to enhance family engagement. which is a little bit of a different spin often when you think about family engagement. So it is one of my favorites because it's one of the case studies that, has a positive ending.
Right.
And it's also, as I said, based in something that really did happen.
Yeah, talk to us for just a second about community asset mapping.
Oh, a second.
I know, sorry. Give us a short synopsis.
Community asset mapping is a process by which school personnel literally can map their community and look at different assets in a way that they haven't looked at before. This is an example. We have probably driven by this laundromat 1,000 times, but suddenly after asset mapping and these teachers approached the owner of the laundromat and said, "Hey, we have this idea." And the owner was supportive. He gets to make money on washing and drying, and the teachers get families and kids to work on math principles. So community asset mapping is a process by which you record everything in your community, and I do mean everything. Laundromats, car dealers, banks, um, everything, and then sit back and ask, how is there a potential for this particular community asset to assist us with our goals in family engagement? Churches are a community asset. Um, small mom and pop grocery stores can be a community asset. Maybe there's a manufacturing plant in your town. Think about the way that might be a community asset. So it's based on the theory of collective impact. It's not exactly collective impact. Collective impact is taking all the resources of the community and focusing them on one big issue. But it's the same idea of collecting assets within the community. And regardless of the wealth of the community, I have yet to see anybody who has partaken in a community asset map that hasn't found out that there's a bunch of places that you might not think about that really could help us and enhance us communicate, engage families.
Okay, well, now that we've learned a little bit about community asset mapping, I think it's easy as education professionals to think about what happens inside the four walls of the school. And while those are necessary and we need to focus on them, I think we lose sight sometimes of the support and the potential that our community has to come alongside us. Peggy, talk about that for a minute and just what you see the value of that being.
Well, I think, as Steve said, the asset mapping is a process by which we build that collective efficacy. And the frame that brings in is that the community solves community problems. So I think the value is identifying those shared goals and coming up with the common agenda. And the school that requires a backbone organization. And the school can serve as that backbone by, again, looking across the community at what are the strengths, the resources that we might have within our community, and how do we build that common goal and agenda for sharing it. And I think this looks at it in a little different twist. I think at least in my years of teaching, we've always had business partnerships or connections, and it usually is a one-way street. It's what can they bring and give to us. And right. I think from this standpoint, that building of a shared goal and a common agenda is what's really important. How can we have more of a symbiotic relationship with parts of our community rather than, what are you going to do for us? And I think in this story, especially, the school as the backbone recognizes that families have to multitask, businesses have to multitask, everyone has to have a benefit to what they do. And so by creating a sense of urgency for problem solving without overwhelming, these are ways to bring in communities to talk rather than just that phone call saying, we have this problem, I need you to do this for us. I think the benefit is schools building a coalition being that backbone organization to bring groups together that they perceive to be as asset, and then talking through some of the things going on and coming up with those goals together.
Right. I think it's sometimes, like, oh, the grocery store can provide us food for this meeting for parents, or, whatever. They can help us with this fall carnival or whatever. But
Right.
we don't often look at what is the greater value that they, provide. And I think right now in today's society, like, think about all the things that are vying for families' time. And if mom and dad are working more than one job to try to make ends meet, what a great opportunity to go where they are,
Right.
and come alongside them that way.
And teachers are going to, if you have an event at school, you're requiring teachers of their time.
Right.
So why not be productive about it so that they too see benefit to the time they spend, rather than being frustrated and, making assumptions when no one comes to the school.
Right. Right. Well, Steve, you talked a little bit earlier about some reasons why families are reluctant to attend things at school, within the school building. What do you think the extra value is to meeting families where they are?
Well, I think because first and foremost, proximity.
Right.
If a family, for example, if there's no family vehicle and they have to rely on public transportation, there's a pretty good chance that the school is far enough where, they can't walk there. But if the laundromat happens to be in their neighborhood, they can easily get there. I think for families who are threatened by the school environment, and we know that they're just not comfortable there, perhaps they didn't have great school experiences
Right.
themselves, or perhaps they're English is a second language, and they feel as though that communication isn't, whatever the issue. I think that moving an event to a community partner helps families attend, helps them feel better if they do have any angst about coming to the school. And I think it solves some of the problem in those schools and districts that we've worked with that have tried these ideas. They almost all report increased attendance and increased interest. I think the other byproduct, not so much about disengaged families, is, toward the end of the case study, the owner of the laundromat was there and watched math night happen. And I think there's also a dividend in helping the community understand what we do and why we do it.
Right.
Toward the end of the story, the owner says, I think what you guys did is great. Hey, I own 5 laundromats. You want to do this in all 5? Of course, that overwhelmed the teachers a little bit, but there's also that aspect too of, a trusted local business, a place where you have no anxiety or no angst about going, can be also a place where schools and parents can meet. And again, we're still going to have math night. We're still going to have to prepare for math night. So we're not asking people to do extra work. All we're saying is, instead of doing it in the school library, let's do it at a laundromat and see what happens.
Yeah, I love the fact that it's neutral ground. I think for everyone, like, it's not my school, it's not my classroom, it's not your house or whatever. It's neutral. Like, we're all going to this laundromat it doesn't mean anything to any of us. Peggy, you have any other thoughts?
Well, I was just thinking about, this is further into the cycle, this case study, because it's building, also building family efficacy and things.
Right.
But I just am reminded of, something that Steve did when he first ventured into that space at his high school, was finding a place at least to get information as a starting point. If some schools aren't ready for this, are they looking at, backing up in the model to just communication? Are they able to get information to the right families who need it? And so these are also businesses and places where communities go, certain stores or, markets in communities where they can hear about these things. It's multi tasking for the school as well, like using it for these events. But now that we know families go here or go to this market or our at-risk families are at this, religious, you know, community. How do we use it across the board to build in all of those areas? I think it's equally important, before they get to this, to think about how we're actually getting the message out in the community as well. Just, again, flyers, information about, this nights, where to get information is equally important.
Yes, great thought there as well. Well, I know that we're closing out this series, and as we close it out, I know that we have all this information and we've looked at case studies. What could you guys share? Just maybe a call to action with our listeners about like next steps, or what? How do you see this moving forward?
I'm going to let Steve finish, so I'll just throw a couple of things in because he's the master of this and he'll wrap it up good. But
I know, I wish everybody could see his face because I can see his wheels turning in his head.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll get mine out of the
there
way.
You go.
We'll make him land in a profound space. But I think, I know when I've gotten ideas from things or attended a conference and had an idea about something, I was excited about the big and scared by the big. So I want to do all of this and it sounds great. And then when it came to like, okay, I need to take that step, I would feel overwhelmed. So I think my advice is simply, grab a friend or two and talk through this. You don't have to do everything at once. And I would suggest, if you can, if they have the rubric, figure out a space where you are, figure out where you are and find one place to take some action, one step towards improving something and build on it. And don't feel overwhelmed by all that we've talked about or all that's in the books or all the things that can and should be accomplished, and don't do it alone.
Steve?
Pressure's on, I guess. I think it's important to remember, to go all the way back to remember that the 5 simple principles are in fact in a hierarchical order. There's a reason why we talk about the culture of an organization before we talk about communication. There's a reason why we talk about communication before we talk about efficacy, because they build upon each other.
Right.
And so I think it's important to remember that family engagement is not just an event or a series of events. Family engagement is a process by which families become a true partner in the learning lives of their children. And I hope that each one of these webinars has built upon those ideas. And so when people, I get people ask me all the time, they say, oh, we just love what you said. Where do we start? I say, well, start at the beginning. And as Peggy said, take one step. Because it can be overwhelming. I mean, the book is full of things. The other books are full, and it's like, my God, your head could spin off trying to get all these things done. But maybe you start with thinking about one challenge that you have that involves families, and think about a different way of approaching the issue, and then try it and see what happens. I can't concur more that win small, win early, and win often is a better approach than trying to change the world overnight. I like to remind folks that families did not become disengaged overnight. They're not going to become re-engaged overnight. I think we have to have some patience, and we have to believe what we know to be true from research is that the vast majority of families want a better life for their child, and they want their children to exceed them rather, in their quality of life. So that's a foundation upon which you can build little things. One less email and one more phone call, or try a different approach, or try a personalized invitation, or there's just small little things that you can do that are not going to absorb a great deal of time, energy, or resource, but will begin to build upon the ideas that the principles put forth. And Peggy mentioned the rubric. I mean, if our listeners have a copy of the case study book, in the back of that book, there is a significant rubric that is extremely helpful in looking at taking all of the principles and all of the clarifying statements and all the things that make up the five simple principles and giving you an idea of, what it would look like at this level, at this level, at this level. And most, if not all, folks who have used it can find themselves on the rubric. Say, oh, here's where we are. Now here's where we'd like to be. And begin taking a step, one thing. And don't give up. If that one thing doesn't pan out the way you want it to, don't fall into the trap of, well, we tried and they don't care. Let's move on. Do it again. Do it differently. If you expected some families to come and they didn't come, call them and see if you can find out what prevented them from coming and what we could do differently that might take away some of the barriers and some of the roadblocks. So, I think if you consider the five principles in the order that they're in, and you take a strong look at where you think you are today, and understanding the influence that families have over their own children, I think it should be relatively easy to. Teachers are the most creative people that I think that are on the planet.
Absolutely.
I joke and say, at the beginning of every year, we give teachers $5 and a box of tongue depressors and say, go knock yourself out. And somehow, they manage to do these wonderful things. So I've always relied on the creativity of teachers, and I've always relied on the fact that I don't. I've never met a teacher that wants to fail. I've never met somebody who is okay with that. Even if they put up a false front and say, I don't care, it's not true. I think we all want to be successful. We all would like better engagement from families. So here's a pathway. Take a step.
I love it. Hey, I'm going to ask one more question. I think we've talked a little bit about the importance of family engagement as it relates to student achievement. You guys both work with educators in pre-service and who are currently teaching and in education. Talk for a second about the well-being and sustainability parent engagement you think it has on our teaching staff.
Doing all the work alone doesn't make sense. And I think it's true of leadership too, spending time with leaders saying you've got to delegate. This is the same kind of thing. And, when I think about myself as a teacher, if I had this in my head and worked collaboratively with my peers to develop the things that we wanted families to know and worked in partnership, I think I would have found my well-being to be more because a lot of frustration comes from the annoyance of feeling like making assumptions. We spend a lot of time with assumptions and frustration and irritation about what we perceive to be apathy. And if we targeted that energy towards this kind of change, because as we've talked about, the research suggests that when we do this, achievement improves, and then we all feel good about those goals. And I think it's just the initial fear of doing it, the initial feeling overwhelmed about what this would take to do it. Put the energy up front and you'll find everlasting joy on the other side. At the same time, understanding that you have to be okay that you won't conquer all, but you'll see a big lift and you'll get that reward in getting back your time and more and better results for students.
I've always known teachers to be interested in ideas and new ideas, even though sometimes, the rhetoric we hear is not another new idea. However, I think what teachers require, and I think they deserve, is proof of concept. Prove to me that this works. And once that happens, once you have that success, it kind of takes off because you realize, Peggy mentioned fear. Fear is a huge barrier for families and for us too. I've talked to scores of educators who are, fearful of calling particular families or fearful of going into particular neighborhoods, if we talk about home visits. And so when you can reach out and build a relationship with one family that you didn't have one with before, you find that there may not be anything to be fearful of. You may have found a new conduit to support the work that you do in your classroom every day.
Absolutely. When I think about the main idea, the story that we talked about recently, that was one teacher doing that work, but, and the benefit was great. But what if that whole team had built the units out that way and then saw collectively the benefit of those things? I had teachers years before I really understood family engagement. They were algebra teachers, and they started doing this on their own with the first of the cell phones. And they recorded each other taking, going through the lesson to put it out there for families who were home with their kids and had homework and didn't know how to do an algebraic equation. So there are early adopters, find those early adopters to work with and have those successes. And that modeling, again, goes back to efficacy. It builds efficacy in our teachers. And my argument to leaders is to remember that. Don't just ask them to do this. Help them do it, help build their efficacy in being good at this, and give them space to take risks while doing it.
I love it. I think the thought of doing it together and the teamwork and the camaraderie that it builds, I think it goes back to that first principle of culture. Like when you have success doing that, your school culture improves, and then we start again. We just go, down the list again of all of the principles that we've talked about. Well, Steve and Peggy, thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise throughout this series. We've had fun learning together. I think too, just personally, I think I want to say thank you to both of you for your lifelong commitment to family engagement in our state, in our nation, and across the world. It truly is valuable work, and we all know it's incredibly worthwhile. So thank you for doing what you do. You truly are your trailblazers, I think, in this little essential field, and don't forget that. So thanks so much for all you've done. And we hope our listeners will join us again on the next episode of Engaging Texas Families.